Stephen McBee Jr. of the McBee Dynasty, real American Cowboys, is another year older, and his father couldn't be any prouder. McBee Farm and Cattle patriarch Steve McBee Sr. gushed over the 32-year-old in a September 21 Instagram post, reflecting on the overwhelming rush of love, awe, protectiveness, and pride a father feels when holding their newborn child. The proud dad continued to write about his unbreakable bond with the eldest of his 4 sons, explaining how his entire life transformed, and that living was no longer about himself. Wrote Steve Sr., "It is about providing, loving, teaching, training, protecting and disciplining that child so that they are a better version of a person than he was himself. A lifelong bond and love is formed that can endure the worst of times and never be broken. And in the end, if that father did his job, his children will feel the same when they look at their newborn child." Steve Sr., who now counts himself a grandfather with the additions of granddaughters Blair Collins McBee and Summerlee McBee, wished the eldest a happy birthday in the post, to which Stephen Jr. said, "Thanks Dad, love you too." On September 22, the acting head of the family business shared a handful of Instagram photos and video clips to show how he celebrated his birthday weekend. He said he had so much fun at the Missouri Quit Company's birthday bash event, where the McBees met up with Southern Charm's Craig Conover and Sally Carson, thanking those who showed up. From the event, he posted an adorable pic of himself and his niece, Blair, the daughter of little bro Cole McBee and Casey Adkisson. "Then this weekend, spent my birthday doing my favorite things, time spent with family, evenings spent 20 feet up a tree, and enjoying the views that fall brings on the farm," Stephen Jr. stated. "Wouldn't have it any other way." One pic had Stephen and Cole in their camouflage getup, followed by a video clip of buck deer grazing away, which could only help Stephen add more antlers around his Gallatin, Missouri home. The proud uncle also made time to stop at the gym with his beloved German Shepherd. If that wasn't enough, in a September 21 IG post, Stephen showed off his music skills on the piano when skillfully playing Richard Marx's 1989 hit, "Right Here Waiting." Stephen captioned the video, "Little Weekend Therapy. Piano ballads just hit a little harder." Over the weekend, Stephen and his father, plus Braden McBee, Jesse McBee, Christy McBee, Galina Saltkovska, Cole and Casey, headed to Hamilton, Missouri, colloquially known as Quilt Town, USA, for MSQ's annual Stitch and Stampede birthday bash. There, the fam sold their farm-raised meats and other merch, participating in several days of meet and greets. On his IG stories, McBee Farm and Cattle, sun-up chores, the steady thump of boots on barn boards, conversations that happened over fences and fences repaired with hands that remembered every winter. If you asked him what mattered most, he'd say plainly, family, land, work. He might add, as an afterthought, "and keep your word," and then go on to the next thing that needed fixing. So when the world of social media began to encroach on the quiet cadences of farm life, Steve adapted in his own honest way. He posted the kind of things he always said out loud in the yard, a photo of a newborn calf, a snapshot of his grandson asleep on a plaid blanket, the occasional clip from a Saturday at the market. But on September 21, his Instagram felt less like a log of work and more like a page torn from his heart. The caption was simple but raw. He wrote about the first time he held Stephen, his eldest son, in his arms, an overwhelming rush of love, awe, protectiveness, and pride. Those words were the sort of recollection that can flatten a man to his truest shape. When he typed them, Steve Sr. had to pause because he could feel his chest tighten the way it had the night his boy was born. The post continued with a lesson about fatherhood that had been lived and not merely preached. Life, after that first cry, was no longer about him. It was about providing, loving, teaching, training, protecting and disciplining. It was about the quiet, unromantic labor of making sure a son could one day look at his own child and understand what it meant to be loved. "Lifelong bond," he wrote, "is formed that can endure the worst of times and never be broken." Then, like any farmer who both pruned the orchard and praised its fruit, he added the hope that if a father did his job, his children would pass that same inheritance along. It was simple, and it hit people that way, straight, plain, and true. Stephen McBee Jr. responded beneath the post with a line that made everyone who'd watched them over the years grin a little, "Thanks Dad, love you too." The exchange was the kind of domestic punctuation that spoke of years, of scraped knees and patched trucks, of being called into the kitchen for a meal after a long day, of quiet apologies and louder forgiveness. To anyone who knew them, it was a continuation of a story that began in the thrum of hay and milk and muscle. His birthday weekend, September 22, read like a love letter to the life he chose. Stephen Jr. shared photos, his smile easy, the sort of smile that had been carved by prairie wind and family ribbing. He'd spent the weekend doing his favorite things, time with family, evenings 20 feet up in a tree, enjoying fall's crisp views across the pasture. The images were the small documentary of a man who balanced gentleness and grit, himself in camouflage with his little brother Cole, a clip of deer grazing undisturbed, an offhand shot in the gym with his German shepherd by his side. There was a video of him at the piano, fingers moving over the keys to Richard Marx's ballad, Little Weekend Therapy, he'd captioned it. For him, music was as much a part of the farm's fabric as the smell of feed and the sound of tractor gears grinding into place. What made the birthday weekend extra colorful was the family's trip to Hamilton, Missouri, Quilt Town, USA, where the Missouri Quilt Company's annual Stitch and Stampede Birthday Bash was underway. The McBees loaded farm-raised meats and merch into the back of the truck and set off. The event was small-town spectacle at its best, women with intricate quilts draped over booths, the smell of frying onions and spices hanging in the air, country music playing off a makeshift stage. It was here that the McBees crossed paths with someone from a different world, Craig Conover of Southern Charm fame, who had come to show off a new sewing line. It was an incongruous moment, and one that Steve Sr. found deliciously hospitable. "This is what Missouri hospitality looks like," he posted on his stories as he watched neighbors and visitors line up at the McBee table to buy sausage and swap jokes. He watched as Stephen Jr. smiled and shook hands with strangers, as his granddaughters, Blair and Summer, made a small parade of knotted ribbons and sticky kisses. To Steve Sr., these were tiny proofs that life's softer parts had taken root in his family: generosity, charm, and an easy willingness to share what they'd worked for. The father thought back to the first time he'd held a newborn in his arms. He could see the hospital lights and feel the cemented certainty that nothing would ever be the same. He remembered the surge of protectiveness, how it settled into his bones like a creed. In the years since, he had tried to translate that protective instinct into action, lessons on how to mend a fence without ruining the board, how to handle a bull's temper, how to wake before dawn and never blame the weather. There were softer lessons too, how to make a child feel seen when the world felt indifferent, how to recognize when a young man needed a steady hand and when he needed to be left to fail and rise. Provide, love, teach, protect, he had written. Those verbs hadn't been mere philosophy, they had been the yardsticks by which he measured his days. He saw it in Stephen Jr.'s patience with younger siblings, in the way Stephen treated his nieces as if he'd raised them himself. He saw it on the tree stands, in the way Stephen could be quiet and attentive for hours, an odd form of meditation that the farm taught, waiting for a deer to appear at dusk. He saw it in his piano playing too, as if the same hands that steadied a 2-ton steer could also coax a melody from ivory and wood. The weekend at Hamilton was a patchwork of small scenes. In one, Stephen Jr. and Cole were in their camouflage, laughing at something only they knew, their faces lit by the autumn sun. In another, the family gathered by a makeshift stage where Craig Conover spoke about his sewing line, and the McBees listened politely, trading stories with the gentleman from television as if he were another neighbor passing through. Later, when the sun abdicated the sky and the air turned crisp, Stephen Jr. climbed to his favorite perch on a high limb overlooking the fields. He liked the vantage point. Up there he could see the world as a chessboard of hedgerows and fence lines, a map of the life he maintained. He liked the quiet company of the wind, the way it made the leaves sound like old pages turning. Steve Sr. watched him from below, a small silhouette against the broad Missouri sky. He thought of the days when Stephen had been a boy with skinned knees and a habit of asking too many questions. He remembered the nights they sat on the porch steps, talking about things that seemed larger than the farm, love and loss, the kind of choices that shape a man. He also remembered the nights that were not talked about, the times when graves of mistakes had been dug and then filled with stubborn work and the slow repair of time. Those nights taught him that being a father was not a one-off moment at the hospital, it was the long excavation of character. On the Stitch and Stampede grounds, the family table was hectic and buoyant. People bought McBee meats because they trusted a name that had stood for honesty. They bought it because the McBees would chat with them, hand over a sample, lean in and ask about their day. It was in those small transactions that Steve felt the purest expression of his principles, providing for his family while sharing the fruits of that work with a wider community. He watched his son move through crowds with an easiness that had been taught at his mother's knee and hardened by a man who believed in steady labor more than clever words. The festival offered more quiet moments too. One afternoon, Stephen Jr. took a break from working the table and sat at a piano someone had set up for festival goers. He played a familiar ballad, no lyrics needed, just an old melody, and a hush fell among a scattering of listeners. When people turned to see who was playing, they found a man who could be just as comfortable at the keys as he was in a pair of muddy boots. Even Steve Sr., standing a little way off, felt the melody move through him like a draft under a door. The song braided into memory and made the weekend feel like a thread pulled taut through years. That night they celebrated. It wasn't fancy. There were candles, a sheet cake, the kind of candles that kids loved and adults pretended not to notice, but it was full. Stephen Jr. posed for a picture with Blair on his lap, the little girl's fingers sticky with frosting and her grin wide enough to flatten any argument. Somewhere, someone filmed Stephen as he joked with Cole and Braden and the others, a family portrait not frozen but moving, every frame a compromise between chaos and love. Steve Sr. felt proud, of course, full of that particular tender pride that elder men often feel and rarely express without a stiff swallow. He thought of his granddaughters, two small people who would carry on a line of stories and quilts and dinners on worn plates. He thought of the afternoons when he taught Stephen how to change a tire, and then the evenings when the same son would play a slow song on the piano for a room full of people, and he realized with a clarity that made his chest ache, this was the inheritance he'd been given the chance to shape. The next morning they were back at the farm, the kind of return that unpacks itself into familiar routines. The livestock were tended to, the generator checked, the dogs walked and scolded with affection. Stephen Jr. made time for the gym where his German shepherd waited like a shadow. They worked out together, muscle and instinct in concert. Later, Stephen would tell his followers that the weekend had been so much fun, and he meant it in the way that men mean fun, when it is measured not by spectacle, but by the warmth of family and the simple joy of being allowed to do what you love.